The warning klaxon was a scream torn from the throat of a dying god. For Kalen, it was just another Tuesday. He slammed his palm against the emergency hull patch, the cheap polymer groaning under the pressure. Red light pulsed through the cramped cockpit of the stray dog, painting his haggard face in shades of arterial spray. Outside, the swirling chaos of the harrowed marches, a graveyard of Accord-era ships and shattered dreams, tore at his scavenged vessel with invisible claws. The ship's diagnostic screen was a Christmas tree of failures, each blinking red light a nail in his coffin. "Just hold together," he growled, the words swallowed by the screech of tormented metal. Just a little longer. He wasn't talking to the ship. He was talking to the ghost that sat in the co-pilot's seat, her form a shimmering outline of guilt and regret. "You promised," she whispered, her voice a memory that had haunted him for 5 cycles. "You promised you'd stop running." "Things change," he muttered, yanking the control yoke hard to port, dodging a phantom mass that the proximity sensors shrieked was both there and not there. Time and space bled into each other out here, haunted by the psychic residue of a failed consensus. It was a place for the desperate and the damned. Kalen was both. That's when he saw it. Not a ghost ship or a temporal anomaly. It was real. A small, biosynthetic Zalari scout, shaped like a manta ray carved from mother of pearl, drifting dead in the void. Its organic hull was pockmarked with micrometeoroid impacts, but the faint, rhythmic pulse of its bioluminescent veins told him it wasn't a wreck. Not yet. Life support was failing, the light song fading into a desperate, silent plea. Humanity's legacy in the fractured galaxy was one of opportunism. A Salvager Guild member would strip the Zalari ship for its resonance engine core and leave the occupants to the void. A follower of the Hollow Saints might see their suffering as holy, a penance for the sins of the elder races. Kalen was just a man who had already failed to save one person. He couldn't bear to fail again, even for strangers. Especially for strangers. They were easier to save. They didn't know the man he used to be. With a curse that was half prayer, he angled the stray dog towards the derelict vessel, the klaxon's scream finally dying into a choked whimper as he rerouted the last of his ship's power to the forward tractor emitters. The ghost in his co-pilot seat vanished. She only ever appeared when he was about to do something reckless. Or something right. He could no longer tell the difference. Lyra's world had shrunk to the rhythmic, fading thrum of the life support system and the small, warm body curled against her side. Her daughter, Alara, slept, her tiny chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that was the only comfort Lyra had left. The ship, an extension of her own will, was dying. Its song, once a vibrant chorus of light and energy, was now a single, fading note in the vast, silent dark of the harrowed marches. Her own bioluminescent patterns, the outward expression of a Zalari's emotional state, had dimmed to a soft, mournful azure. Her veins, usually alight with the calm turquoise of a mother's peace, now flickered with the pale silver of fear. She had fled the dogmatic rituals of the Order of the Luminous Remembrance, seeking a life for Alara free from the crushing weight of a past that wasn't hers to bear. They demanded echo tithes, the ritual offering of one's most potent experiences to be archived, to be owned by the collective. Lyra would not let them have Alara's joy. She would not let them have her own grief. So she had run, only to find herself adrift in a place where memory itself was a predator. "Mama?" Alara's voice was a whisper, her large, dark eyes blinking open. The child's veins pulsed with a gentle, lilac light, a stark contrast to the ship's dying blue. "Is the song sleeping?" Lyra smoothed the fine, silky hair from her daughter's brow. "Yes, little star. It's just resting." A lie. A mother's desperate shield against a terrifying truth. They were out of time. Then, a new vibration shuddered through the hull. It was harsh, metallic, graceless, nothing like the organic hum of Zalari technology. A deep, guttural clanging echoed through the deck plates, followed by the hiss of a magnetic seal. An outsider. Here, in this forgotten hellscape, fear, cold and sharp, lanced through Lyra. Her arm tightened around Alara, her own light flaring a defensive, angry crimson before she suppressed it. The stories were clear. Humans were scavengers, unpredictable, their emotions a chaotic storm compared to the focused resonance of a Zalari. They were the children of a broken age, picking over the bones of their elders. The airlock door cycled open with a groan of protest. A figure stood silhouetted against the harsh, sterile light of its own vessel. It was tall for a human, clad in a patched, grease-stained shipsuit. The helmet was off, revealing a face etched with exhaustion. Scars, faint and white, mapped one side of his jaw. But it was his eyes that held her. They were a startling, world-weary gray, and in their depths, she saw an echo of her own grief, a sorrow so profound it felt like a familiar, dissonant chord in the universal song. He held up his hands, palms open. A gesture of peace, she knew from the old Accord records. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his voice rough, as if he hadn't used it for some time. "Your ship is failing. I can help." Lyra's gaze flickered from the man to her daughter, who was now sitting up, watching with wide, curious eyes. Trust was a currency she no longer possessed. Every interaction in this fractured galaxy was a transaction, and she had nothing left to offer. "Why?" The word was sharp, suspicious. Her resonance, the psionic field that all Zailari generated, wrapped around the question, imbuing it with a demand for truth. It was a subtle probe, a test of his intent. The human flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw. He could feel it. Not the meaning, perhaps, but the pressure, the psychic weight of her question. Most humans were psionically deaf, but this one was different. He seemed to feel the edge of her mind, the ghost of her voice in his thoughts. "Because," he finally answered, his gray eyes fixed on Alara, "no child should have to watch the stars go out." The answer was so unexpected, so deeply resonant with the core of her own terror, that Lyra's carefully constructed walls of distrust fractured. For a moment, the crimson of her fear softened, swirling with a faint, uncertain gold, the color of nascent hope. Kalen worked with a grim efficiency that Lyra found both unsettling and grudgingly impressive. He moved through her dying ship with a practiced familiarity, his hands sure as he bypassed fried energy conduits and patched weeping coolant lines. He didn't speak much, his words reserved for clipped, technical assessments. Yet, Lyra found herself watching him, studying the way his brow furrowed in concentration, the weariness that clung to him like a shroud, and the strange, pained gentleness in his eyes whenever he glanced at Alara. Her daughter, for her part, was utterly fascinated. She would sit cross-legged on a meditation mat a safe distance away, her head tilted, her lilac light pulsing with curiosity. "Why is your light all on the inside, human Kalen?" she asked one cycle, her voice piping up from the quiet hum of the now stable life support. Kalen, halfway through splicing a power cable, froze. He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "We don't have lights. Not like you." "Oh." Alara seemed to ponder this. "Is it because you're broken?" Lyra's breath caught in her throat. "Alara, that is not a kind question." But Kalen just offered a wry, sad smile. "Yeah, kid, maybe that's why." He turned back to his work, but not before Lyra saw the shadows in his eyes deepen. He was a man carrying a heavy burden, a memory wreck of his own. The repairs took 3 full cycles. The stray dog and Lyra's ship, the Starlight's Echo, remained latched together, a strange pairing of scavenged human grit and elegant Zailari design. In that time, a fragile, unspoken routine formed. Lyra would prepare nutrient paste, a bland but universal sustenance. Kalen would eat it without complaint, his gaze often distant, lost in a past she couldn't access. He never pried, never asked why she was alone in the marches. He seemed to understand the sanctity of unspoken grief. That, more than anything, allowed a sliver of trust to take root in the barren soil of Lyra's heart. She began to notice the small things. How he always made sure the lighting in her ship remained soft and blue-shifted, mimicking a Zailari dawn. How he'd leave a small, polished river stone he carried in his pocket near Alara's sleeping mat, a silent offering of something solid and real in their transient existence. The breakthrough, the first true point of contact, came during the 3rd sleep cycle. A resonance squall, a common and lethal phenomenon in the marches, swept over them without warning. It wasn't a physical tempest, but a psionic one, a chaotic tsunami of raw emotion and the fractured memories of the failed consensus that haunted this sector. The air grew thick, charged with the psychic echoes of terror, rage, and despair. Lyra's ship, designed to channel and harmonize resonance, was overwhelmed. The lights flickered wildly, shifting through a cacophony of violent reds and panicked yellows. The ship's song became a scream of agony. Lyra cried out, clutching her head as the psychic shrapnel tore at her mind. She felt the last moments of a Veltari dream engineer as his consensus collapsed, a defiant terror of a Solari root warden as his ship was torn apart. Alara was shrieking, her own lilac light flickering like a dying candle as the storm threatened to overwhelm her nascent psionic abilities. Suddenly, Kalen was there, his big, solid form a bulwark against the chaos. He knelt before Lyra, his face grim. "What's happening?" A resonance squall, she gasped, pain making her words ragged. "It's too much, the ship can't filter it." "Then don't filter it," he said, his voice a strange anchor of calm in the maelstrom. "Ground it." "I can't. I need a focus, a silent point in the storm, and there is nothing but noise." His gray eyes met hers, and in that moment, he made a choice. He reached out, his calloused, trembling hand hovering in the space between them. He was psionically deaf, yes, but not numb. He was an absence, a void in the wailing chorus of the dead. He was the silence she needed. "Use me," he said, his voice low and certain. Hesitation warred with desperation. To a Zaelari, physical contact was a deeply intimate act, a blending of resonances. This was resonant imprinting, unpredictable, dangerous. The high houses like Verne forbade all contact, viewing it as spiritual contamination. But her clan was exiled. They had learned to be pragmatic. Survival was its own sacred right. Alara's cries were growing weaker, her light dimming dangerously. With a sob of surrender, Lyra reached out and took his hand. The moment their skin met, the universe exploded. For Kalen, it was like being plunged into an ocean of pure feeling. He felt Lyra's terror, her fierce, desperate love for her child, the deep, aching sorrow of her exile. It was overwhelming, 1,000 voices screaming in his soul. But beneath it all, he felt her, a core of quiet strength, a will of tempered steel. He saw flashes of her life, a luminous city under a blue giant, the cold judgment of robed Zaelari elders, the joyful, lilac pulse of her daughter's birth light. And then, he felt her touch his own pain. He saw the fire, the collapsing corridors of Vault 13, her hand slipping from his grasp. "You promised." The memory, his constant, silent companion, was suddenly laid bare, shared between them. He felt Lyra's shock, her sudden, intuitive understanding of his burden. He felt her flinch away from the raw, jagged edges of his guilt, but she didn't let go. Instead, her own resonance shifted. It flowed into him, not to heal, but to shield. It wrapped around the burning core of his trauma, not extinguishing it, but containing it, giving him a moment of reprieve from the self-inflicted torment. For Lyra, touching his mind was like touching a black hole. It was a place of immense gravity, of collapsed light. She saw the woman, Anya, felt the echo of his love for her, the bottomless chasm of his failure. She understood, in a way that transcended words, why he was so broken. He was a protector who had failed to protect. And in that shared vulnerability, a new color bloomed in her own bioluminescent veins, a deep, resonant indigo. The color of empathy. Together, they became the eye of the storm. Lyra, using his psychic silence as an anchor, drew the chaotic energies of the squall into herself and, through their joined hands, grounded it into the vast, empty well of his grief. The psychic scream of the marches funneled through them, leaving the ship in a sudden, ringing silence. The storm passed. The ship's lights settled back into a calm, blue-white hum. Alara, exhausted but safe, had cried herself to sleep. Slowly, Lyra withdrew her hand. The space between them tingled with the aftershock of their connection. They looked at each other, no longer a human and a Zaelari, a scavenger and an exile. They were two survivors, scarred and weary, who had seen the deepest wounds in each other's souls and had not looked away. Kalen was the first to break the silence, his voice hoarse. "I'm sorry." "For what?" Lyra whispered, her own voice trembling. "For what you saw." She shook her head, the indigo light in her veins pulsing gently. "You are not the only one who carries ghosts, Kalen." In the quiet that followed, something new settled between them. It was not yet trust. It was not yet hope. But it was a shared silence, a place where their broken pieces could lie side by side without judgment. And in the fractured, lonely expanse of the void, that was more than enough. Kalen found he was making excuses to stay. The stray dogs. Power converters needed recalibrating, a task he could have done in a day but stretched to a week. The starlight's echo. required a full diagnostic of its bio-neural pathways, a delicate process he claimed required his constant supervision. He was lying to himself. He stayed because of the quiet moments. He stayed for the way Lyra's bioluminescence would shift to a warm, golden hue when she watched Alara play, a small, private sunrise in the dim confines of the ship. He stayed for the surprisingly complex flavor of the root stew she learned to synthesize, a taste of a life he'd never known. He stayed because, for the first time in 5 years, the ghost in his co-pilot's seat was silent. His interest in Lyra had taken root in the shared trauma of the resonance squall and was now growing, a fragile vine in the wreckage of his heart. He found himself watching her, memorizing the graceful, deliberate way she moved, the subtle shift of light in her veins that betrayed her thoughts more than any words. He saw the fierce intelligence in her eyes, the unyielding strength that had carried her and her child this far. He wanted to reach out, to close the small distance between them. But every time he thought of it, the ghost of his past would stir. The memory of fire and failure at Vault 13 would rise like bile in his throat. He had failed Anya. He had promised her a future and led her to her death in the drifting monastery when it was overrun by hollow saints. How could he offer anything to Lyra but a repeat of the same tragedy? He was a walking curse, a harbinger of loss. So he kept his distance, channeling his feelings into his work, his hands always busy, always fixing something that was broken. It was easier than trying to fix himself. Lyra, in turn, was a study in cautious observation. Her initial distrust had been eroded by the squall, but years of exile had taught her that calm waters often concealed treacherous currents. She saw the way Kalen's gaze would soften when he looked at her, the hunger for connection in his eyes. She felt the gentle pull of his quiet presence, a stark contrast to the demanding, intrusive resonance of the Zalari males she had known. But she also saw his hesitation, the walls he threw up whenever the emotional proximity between them grew too close. He would be sharing a quiet moment with her and Alara, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips, and then, as if remembering something terrible, he would retreat, his expression shuttered, his focus returning to the guts of a machine. She interpreted it as a human flaw, a wariness born of his scavenger life. Or worse, a sign that he, too, saw them as a temporary port in a storm, a problem to be solved before moving on. The thought sent a chill of her old fear through her, and her own walls would rise to meet his. Alara, with the innocent wisdom of a child, seemed to sense the invisible barrier between them. She became a gentle, unwitting bridge. She would take Kalen's hand and lead him to Lyra, insisting he watch as she practiced tracing the glowing glyphs of the Zalari alphabet in the air. "Look, Mama, human Kalen is learning the spiral of remembering," she would announce, her lilac light pulsing with pride. In those moments, forced into proximity by the small, warm hand that held both of theirs, the tension was palpable. Kalen's gaze would meet Lyra's over their daughter's head, and the air would crackle with unspoken words. The pull was there, an undeniable gravity. But the fear was there, too, his fear of his past, her fear of the future. One cycle, as Kalen was running a final diagnostic on the Echo's resonance engine, Lyra approached him, holding out a steaming cup. "Herbal infusion," she said softly. "It helps to settle the mind." He took it, their fingers brushing. A tiny spark of shared warmth, a flicker of psionic connection, jumped between them. It was faint, a mere echo of the squall, but it was there. Both of them felt it. Kalen pulled his hand back as if burned, his knuckles white as he gripped the cup. "Thanks," he mumbled, turning away, his shoulders tense. The rejection, however slight, was a physical blow. Lyra's light flickered, the warm gold of her tentative offering dimming to a cool, distant blue. "You are repaired," she stated, her voice regaining its formal, guarded tone. "Your ship is functional. You are free to leave." Kalen flinched. He turned back to her, his face a mask of conflict. He opened his mouth to say something. "I don't want to go." But the ghost of Anya was whispering in his ear again. "You'll only hurt them, too. The energy couplings need one more check," he said instead, his voice flat. "Can't be too careful." He retreated back into the engine room, leaving Lyra standing alone in the corridor, the silence between them now a chasm. She looked down at her own hand, the one that had held his for a fleeting, hopeful moment. The indigo of empathy was gone, replaced by the bruised purple of hurt. She had allowed herself a moment of hope, and he had pushed her away. She wouldn't make that mistake again. From now on, he was simply the human who had saved them. A debt to be acknowledged, but not a connection to be nurtured. Her heart, she decided, was a territory too dangerous to be explored. Especially by a man who was clearly terrified of his own. The decision was made in silence. The repairs were complete. There were no more excuses. It was time for Kalen to leave. He stood in the airlock connecting the stray dog to the starlight's echo. Lyra stood a few feet away, her expression serene and unreadable, her bioluminescence a placid, neutral blue. Alara was by her side, her small hand clutching her mother's, her lilac light tinged with the sad gray of farewell. All systems are green, Kalen said, the technical jargon a shield against the emotion clogging his throat. Your ship is as good as new. Better, even. We are grateful for your assistance, Kalen, Lyra said, her voice polite, distant. It was the voice of a stranger. May your path be safe. It felt like a dismissal. A final, courteous severing of the fragile bond they had forged. The pain of it was a physical thing, a shard of ice in his chest. This was what he wanted, wasn't it? To leave before he could cause them harm? To walk away before his curse could catch up to them? Then why did it feel like he was tearing his own heart out? He knelt, bringing himself down to Alara's level. You be good, kid, he said, his voice thick. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, smooth river stone, pressing it into her hand. Something to remember me by. Alara looked from the stone to his face, her lower lip trembling. Will your light ever come back on? She whispered. The innocent question struck him with the force of a plasma blast. He looked up at Lyra, and for a moment, he saw a crack in her serene facade. He saw the indigo of empathy, the memory of their shared pain, flicker in her veins. She hadn't forgotten. She had just hidden it away. Before he could answer, the universe answered for him. The ship lurched violently, throwing them all against the walls. A new alarm blared through the echo. Not a resonance warning, but something far more visceral. A proximity and weapons lock alert. Kalen scrambled to the cockpit, Lyra right behind him. On the main viewscreen, a ship was decloaking. It was a jagged, predatory thing, an asymmetrical nightmare of cobbled-together parts and brutalist design. Its hull was adorned with crudely painted symbols, the markings of the Hollow Saints. Kalen's blood ran cold. It was the same faction, the same zealots who had overrun Vault 13. They believed humans must suffer to earn their place among the elder races, and they were methodical in their cruelty. They must have tracked my FTL signature from the marches, Kalen breathed, his mind racing. They weren't here for the Zalari ship. They were here for him. For the man who had escaped their holy massacre. A loose end. A blasphemer who had survived the crucible meant to purify him. A tinny, fanatic's voice crackled over the comms, uninvited. The survivor of Vault 13. The echo that will not fade. Your suffering is incomplete. We have come to finish the prayer. Their forward weapon ports glowed with energy. They're going to fire, Lyra stated, her hand resting on the weapons console. The Echo was a scout ship, not a warship, but it wasn't defenseless. Don't, Kalen commanded, moving to stand between her and the console. Their ship will tear us apart. Our only chance is to run. The FTL drive needs time to cycle, and they are blocking our path. Then we make a new one. His eyes were wild, his mind working faster than it had in years. He wasn't the broken scavenger anymore. He was Kalen, the pilot who had flown blockade runs in the Outer Rim, the man who had once been more machine than flesh in a cockpit. That man had died with Anya. But his ghost remained. Detach our ships, he ordered. I'll draw their fire. It's me they want. When I give the signal, you jump. Don't wait. Don't look back. Lyra stared at him, her eyes wide. You'll be destroyed. They're not going to kill me, he said, a grim, terrifying certainty in his voice. They're going to board me. They want to make an example of me. He was offering himself up as a sacrifice. No. The word was soft, but it held the unyielding power of a collapsing star. Lyra, this isn't a debate. It's the only way. There is another way, she said, her crimson light intensifying, her resonance flooding the cockpit, not with fear, but with a fierce, unwavering resolve. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and he saw everything she had been holding back. Her fear, her hope, her anger, and the fragile, terrifying emotion that had been growing between them. I have seen your ghost, Kalen, she said, her voice dropping to an intense whisper. I will not let you become another one. She reached out, not for the weapon controls, but for his hand. She pulled him toward the pilot's seat, her touch electric. Fly, she commanded. Fly like you did before her. The words hit him harder than any weapon. Before her. Before the fall. Before he broke. She was asking him to be the man he thought was dead. As his hands closed over the controls, he felt her resonance flow into him, not as a storm, but as a steady, strengthening current. He felt her trust, her faith, her impossible, reckless belief in him. It was a weight, but it was also a pair of wings. The Hollow Saints ship fired. A bolt of incandescent plasma screamed toward them. Kalen didn't flinch. He threw the stray dog into a spiraling dive, the smaller, more agile ship responding instantly. The plasma bolt scorched past their viewport, missing by meters. He felt Lyra's sharp intake of breath, her pulse a frantic drum against his own. Their targeting is predictive, Lyra said, her mind, attuned to the ship's systems, feeding him information faster than any display could. They're anticipating your moves based on standard evasion patterns. Good, Kalen growled, a feral grin spreading across his face. Let's give them something non-standard. He cut the main thrusters, sending the dog into a dead forward drift, making them an easy target. The enemy ship adjusted, powering up for a killing blow. Kalen, what are you doing? Lyra cried out, her trust wavering. Trust me, he said, his eyes locked on the enemy. At the last possible second, he slammed the emergency thrusters to full, shunting them laterally while firing the dorsal maneuvering jets. The dog flipped end over end, dodging the plasma bolt and flying under the enemy ship, its belly scraping against the Zealot's hull with a deafening screech of metal. For a moment, they were in the enemy's blind spot. Now, he yelled. Lyra's hands flew over her own console. She wasn't firing weapons. She was activating the Echo's resonance engine, which was still magnetically clamped to their hull. But she wasn't using it to power the ship. She was turning it into a psionic bomb. The resonance, it is tied to me, she said through gritted teeth, her body trembling with the effort. A brilliant, blinding indigo light poured from her veins, flooding the cockpit. Alara, close your eyes. Lyra, what are you doing? Kalen yelled, feeling the immense power building. I am showing them my memory, she gasped. She was projecting the raw, undiluted memory of the resonance squall, the terror, the chaos, the million screaming ghosts of the marches, directly into the minds of the psionically sensitive zealots on the other ship. The Hollow Saints vessel convulsed. Its lights flickered erratically. Its disciplined attack pattern dissolved into chaos as its crew was suddenly plunged into a psychic hell of someone else's making. It was their chance. Hold on, Kalen screamed. He fired every thruster he had, propelling the two joined ships away from the floundering enemy. The FTL drive of the Echo whined, fully charged. He looked at Lyra. Her face was pale, sweat beading on her brow. The indigo light was fading, her strength spent. But she was looking at him, a fierce, triumphant smile on her lips. I can't love someone if I can't forgive myself, he blurted out, the words torn from the deepest, most guarded part of his soul. The confession, his great, defining wound, was laid bare in the heat of their impossible victory. Lyra's smile softened. She reached out, her fingers tracing the scar on his jaw. Her touch was no longer hesitant. It was certain. You just flew like a man who has nothing to be forgiven for, she whispered. That is the man I see. That is the man Alara sees. The FTL drive engaged. The stars on the viewscreen stretched into streaks of blue and white light, pulling them away from the harrowed marches, away from the Hollow Saints, away from the ghosts of their past. Kalen looked from Lyra's face to where Alara was peeking out from behind a seat, her lilac light bright and steady. In her hand, she clutched the small riverstone he had given her. A promise. His own ghost, the one that had sat beside him for 5 long years, was gone. In its place was a warmth he hadn't felt since before the fire. He was still broken. He was still scarred. But as he looked at the Zaelari female and her child, their light a beacon in the dark, he realized that perhaps some broken things could be put back together. Not as they were, but as something new. Something stronger. He reached out and took Lyra's hand. Their fingers intertwined, a perfect, seamless fit. Her light, a mix of gold and indigo, pulsed in time with his own beating heart. "Where are we going?" he asked, the question not about a destination, but a future. Lyra squeezed his hand, her answer a simple, profound truth that echoed in the quiet hum of the ship. "Home."